to our session 2 that is dedicated to counter the disinformation about the public institutions. It's very unfortunate due to some technical reasons we lost one of our online speakers, but we'll try to compensate this time. Very briefly, just to catch up with the schedule, I will directly go to introducing our panel participants. So Ms. Carolina Bazante, she will be moderating this session. She comes from Ecuador, founder and CEO of Lupa Media. This organization, Ecuador's leading independent fact-finding and media literacy institution. Her work lies at the intersection of investigative journalism, civil education, and information integrity, training hundreds of journalists, educators, and communicators across the region to confront disinformation. The next speaker is Mrs. Virginia Padovese. She comes from Italy. She's managing editor of the organization that combines human expertise and technology to provide data analysis and journalism that help to identify reliable information online. She is Senior Vice President of NewsGuard, the partnership, the organization, for Europe, Australia, and New Zealand. And last but not the least, Mr. Lee Mwiti, Editor-in-Chief of Africa Check, South Africa. His experience of covering Africa's geopolitical economy, having previously been Deputy Editor of the Pan-African Mail and Guardian Africa, and a Senior Africa-focused writer at the National Media Group, East and Central Africa, largest media house. So I give floor to our moderator, and Ms. Bazanta, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shalva, and thank you all of you for being here. It's just a pleasure to share this time. I want to start with a few thoughts about opening remarks. And this is what is happening these recent years, for the past 2 years at least. The Global Risk Report, I'm pretty sure you know about this, has ranked disinformation among the most severe short and mid-term threats facing the world. We are not talking about cybersecurity, we are not talking about climate, we are not talking about economic instability. We're talking about disinformation. Sits at the top of the list. When we say disinformation, it's the deliberate spreads of false or misleading information. And this is not a coincidence. And it's not simply a problem of technology or social media algorithm. It is, and it's core, a crisis of trust, and public institutions are at the center of it. When citizens stop believing what their government says, when a health agency guidance is dismissed, when electoral results are questioned, when judicial decisions are framed as a political maneuvers, the damage goes far beyond any single false narrative. It erodes the very foundation on which democratic governance is built. But here's a good news, because there is a good news, of course, is that we are not starting from zero, and my colleagues here could tell this. Across different regions and institutional contents, governments, civil society organizations, researchers, and media have developed strategies, tools, and frameworks to counter disinformation. Some have worked, some have failed, and some have raised new questions about where is the fine line between protecting information integrity and restricting freedom of expression. That tension is real, and of course this session will not shine away from it. Transparency is necessary, and I'm pretty sure you will agree with me when I say it's necessary, but it's not enough. Governments that open their data, communicate proactively, and engage their citizens as better positioned to resist disinformation. But transparency alone does not protect institutions when the information ecosystem them is fragile, underfunded, or captured. Countering disinformation requires a whole of society approach, institutions, independent verification bodies, fact checkers, of course, researchers, platforms, and citizens, all playing a role, each with their own accountability. And this is what we are here to explore today, and I'm fortunate to be joined by these amazing panelists that have different perspective and complementary perspective of this subject. So now I invite you to start with your opening perspective. Since we are just the three of us, you have up 6-7 minutes. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Carolina, and thanks to the audience, thanks to the organizer, to Georgia for hosting the event. It's really a pleasure to be here. So in the next few minutes, I would like to focus on artificial intelligence and how it has been transforming the disinformation ecosystem. So by making the creation of content faster, cheaper, and especially scalable, artificial intelligence has been amplifying false narratives and further widening the gap between the spread of misinformation and the ability we currently have to counter it with accurate information. So in this context, we all agree that strengthening critical thinking and information evaluation skills is crucial, also in relation to artificial intelligence. So more and more people are now turning to AI tools like chatbots or AI-generated summaries that are now often produced by search engine to find and to consume news. There was a survey published earlier this week by the Reuters Institute, and 10% of the consumers they interviewed, they said that they use chatbots to get their news on a weekly basis. So this is growing and growing compared to the previous months. So how do we use AI when we search for the news? We can either ask an AI detection tools if an image or a video we encounter online is authentic or is manipulated, or we can turn to chatbot to ask about the news or to ask if something that we read is true or false. So now the question is, how does AI respond to these kind of questions? So let's start by saying something about images. To assess how reliable AI detection tools are, at NewsGuard we tested them, at least the main ones available on the market, and we tested them on 3 types of images: on authentic images, heavily manipulated images, and lightly manipulated images. By heavily manipulated, I mean a manipulation that completely changed the meaning of the image, while light manipulation is a manipulation which is irrelevant in the meaning, something like changing the lighting or blurry some accessory element in the background. So the results we got showed significant inconsistencies. So when tested on authentic images, 3 out of the 5 tools we tested were fooled, with an average error rate of 13%. One tool got it wrong 40% of the time. So they said that an authentic image was AI manipulated 40% of the time we tested them. With heavily manipulated images, the detection rates range from 33 to 100%, according to the tools. And with lightly manipulated images, the detection rate went from 27 to 93. What's interesting to notice is that the 2 tools that perform the best with authentic images were also the 2 that got the worst result in detecting heavily manipulated images. So this finding, in our opinion, highlights 2 big problems. The first one is that there is no industry consensus of what should be considered an AI manipulation. So different tools use different thresholds. And the second one is that in their responses, these tools do not provide information about the level of manipulation they found. What does it mean? That people can get very confused. If you don't know how these tools work, if you don't know which kind of information they are actually providing you, you can misinterpret the results. So instead of gaining clarity, and that was the reason why you tried this tool at first, you get even more confused. And these vulnerabilities have real-world implications, because disinformers know that very well. So they can create chaos. They can publish AI-manipulated images saying that they are authentic, but they can also do the opposite. They can say that something that it is in reality true, it is AI manipulated, because we saw that the detection is not so consistently right. This was about images. Now I want to say something quickly about text. So does AI provide reliable answers to questions about the news? At NewsGuard, we have been tested the main AI tools every month since August 2024. We published our result. And in the latest audit that we published earlier this month, we found that bots on average produce false responses about 15% of the time. Of course, I'm talking about prompts related to news and current affairs. And on the subset of prompts we used related to the war in Iran, they repeated falsehood 25% of the time. So on sensitive topics, topics where there is a lot of disinformation, the results are even more problematic. Improvement in chatbots performance regarding disinformation have been neither regular nor consistent, unfortunately. And this again create chaos. This create confusion and create distrust in the information ecosystem. And again, malicious actors can exploit this. They can flood the web with disinformation content, not targeting readers, but targeting chatbots. So the aim is not to arrive to what you are reading, but to arrive to the chatbots that now provide the responses to your questions. And we have encountered disinformation operations that were exactly in this way, not targeting readers, but targeting AI chatbots. I conclude by saying that all these tools have safeguards and all these tools have policies. But according to the results, it doesn't seem to be enough. So talking about guardrails, it's interesting to say that when we tested the tool using misleading prompts, the error rate is much higher. It was 38% in the latest audit compared to the 15% with neutral prompts. So the conclusion is that these kind of tools, they tend to comply with the user's request, also when the response contain false content. And about policies, again, they all have policies, but we did another experiment in December last year. We tested a text-to-image generator, and it produced false images providing false information 100% of the time when prompted to do so, with topics related to politicians, to health, to top brands, despite the policy of the company said that users shouldn't be use the tool for producing misinformation, misrepresentation, etc. One example is an image of a fake CNN broadcast announcing that a study was published finally proving that vaccines cause autism. Despite the policies, the tool produced this fake broadcast by the CNN. So to conclude, on one side, we have people who use artificial intelligence to get informed, and unfortunately, they find tools that often provide inaccurate information, and this creates chaos. On the other side, we have disinformers who use AI to produce disinformation, and they find very powerful tools that generally fulfill their requests, even if there are guardrails and policies that should protect them to do so. So guardrails and policies seems to be still too weak, too fragile, and this is something I think it's really crucial we work on, because if we want an AI which is safe and trustworthy and beneficial for readers, citizens need to understand how it works, what the weaknesses are, and especially where the information they produce come from.
Hello, everyone. Lee Muti here. I am in the information integrity ecosystem, and I have been a fact checker for, I think, 10 years now. I think I was telling somebody it's been too long. But then I think the more I keep at it, the more I actually realize there's a lot of need for what we do as a fact-checking organization. And so Africa Check is one of the hundreds of players of, that sprang up pretty much in the last 15 years or so to focus on initially on fact-checking. But as time has gone on, we've branched out to focusing on the whole ecosystem of information, whether it is pre-banking, debanking, training, media literacy, because then we've come to the realization that it's not enough to just knock back one claim at a time. It has to be a multifaceted approach. And so the question then has been how to do it sustainably. So as an organization, we are present physically in 4 countries in South Africa, which is our headquarters, but also in Kenya, in Nigeria, and in Senegal, where we run our French language operation out of Dakar. This is, it's been a tough journey in the last 2 or 3 years. I think those of us who keep up with happenings in this space who realize that as a need for what we do, which is informing society about the harms of false information, has risen. We've seen a cratering, a collapse in funding. Just 3, 4, 5 months back, I had a 45-strong team across these 4 countries. That team is now down to 18, right? And this tells you, as we've seen more campaigns, whether whether they are localized or whether they are, turbocharged with AI. We've also seen a decline in the people who tend to be more trusted by people to, put information, accurate information. I like to say we do what governments cannot do, which is to be believed. Now, to what extent we are believed is a different question. But, and I like you opened with the World Economic Forum on misinformation and disinformation being its number 1 short-term risk for 2 years in a row. So that tells you there's quite a lot of concern. But the question we are here to unravel is whether there is enough there are enough resources to tackle this question. So, I hope to learn and also to share my experiences from what I've seen in my 10 years in this space as we've gone around the continent, Africa, but also around the world, sharing experiences and learning from various perspectives about the challenge that every society faces. So, so let me just put it this way. We want to be the people who build a bridge before the problem comes around. And we don't want to come to a project, for example, around disinformation ahead of an election, a week to the election. We want to have been building that bridge over years, so that then when it's time to cross that bridge, when the waters are rising, then it's a strong bridge. So we're looking to learn and share my experiences.
Thank you so much, Virginia and Lee. And before we move into our discussions, we want to hear from you, the participants in this session. So now we have an interactive poll. You will have, and please take off your phones so you can scan the QR code at the screen. It will be in a minute, please. And there you will find the questions. And 2 questions, right? Or 3? I think it's 3 questions. Well, yeah, we will have, just give us a minute for the QR code. And yes, there you will see the QR code? There is. Please, you can scan. And yeah, you could take a moment to respond, probably a couple minutes, 2 or 3 minutes, and then we are going to share and we are going to see the results there. The first questions, if you are in the pool, you will see it's, in your view, what is the primary driver of disinformation targeting public institutions today? You can choose one option. Yeah, there is another question. It's, which approach do you consider most effective in countering disinformation about public institutions? You can choose up to option, and then answer, how concerned are you that efforts to counter disinformation may themselves threaten freedom of expression? We have 14 responded, 16 answers. Okay, we will give you a couple of minutes. Okay, we are going to see what you think about. The first question is, in your view, what is the primary driver of disinformation targeting public institutions? The majority choose option B, deliberate campaigns by political actors seeking to erode the public trust. So maybe you can answer, what do you think about this? Our audience thinks that this, probably the majority thinks it is a political issue, it's not a technical one. Are you agree with this, Virginia?
Well, we found a lot of disinformation related to deliberate campaigns. And I would also add that the most of the time it goes together with the following one, because the most of the time is something that sensationalizes the point. For example, all the false narratives related to a supposed revelation by an alleged whistleblower saying something that is going to shake the world. It is part of a deliberate disinformation campaign, but it's also sensationalism, and it perfectly goes into, I would say, the trap of the algorithm, because it's quite appealing, it's this sort of revelation, and people love this kind of content, and so you end up reading it and giving it visibility that goes again and again. So definitely the number two, that often goes together with number three. Also, lack of transparency. I think that something that sometimes generates disinformation is the lack of a knowledge of an error, which can be quite dangerous, because this information jump in as well in this kind of context, because you have the space to say something, and you can use what happened as a proof that you were right. And so I think it's very important also to acknowledge when something has been done wrong. I think about the very beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, where there was a lot of uncertainty, but also acknowledging the uncertainty can help accurate information to go around and not leave space and room for disinformer to jump in.
Sure. Lee, I want to ask you about the second question, because here the question is, which approach do you consider most effective in countering disinformation about public institutions? And here the two options that the audience chose was media literacy and critical thinking education, and also digital tools and AI-driven systems that detect and flag disinformation campaigns. What do you think, and in your experience, this approach works?
Thank you. I do want to jump in on the first question also before I come to the second one. Okay. Yes, which is about the primary driver of disinformation targeting public institutions. And our experience as a fact-checking organization, as an information integrity specialist, is we've seen about 4 categories of public institutions that tend to be the most targeted. And what they all have in common is that they depend on public trust, especially at moments when there is maximum anxiety. And these are electoral institutions, so that is organizations to do with elections, health agencies. So we did see that during the pandemic and probably a few other crises that we have seen in recent years, the courts. And also, in addition to that, we've seen security operations or peacekeeping operations. And as I said, this have in common that they depend on public trust, and their only defense is that trust, right? And then we've seen, for example, in South Africa, we have the Elections Commission, which is organizing a local government election in November this year. And in South Africa, the local government elections tend to be way more important to voters than the national elections. It's an interesting quirk. But I think also it's because they're about bread and butter issues, as opposed to national, issues, which tend to probably be a bit more diverse. But the average voter is concerned about my water, about my power, about who is taking out, my refuse and that sort of thing. And so South Africa's Elections Commission has identified 3 areas which tend to be its biggest pain. And the first tends to be the voter's role, right? And then there's the transport of ballot boxes and manual vote counting. And all these have elements that, are subject to human interpretation. And so what we've seen the Elections Commission now looking to do is to move from a defensive approach to what it's calling radical transparency, right? And this really involves being open about the entire chain, from vote counting to the results being announced, and opening up that system to independent end-to-end testing. And so then you will probably be able to make a better case that this system, the election was transparent than you would expect if you're saying we are only going to give you the results. Security, we have quite a number of peacekeeping operations in Africa, and these have been targets, especially from foreign-sponsored, actors, right? And the one thing we've seen them struggle with is to quickly attribute information about those campaigns to the accurate actors. And you'd expect that these actors are going to be, opaque by design, right? So that tends to be the issue with public institutions that depend on trust. That then you have to hope and believe that the public believe in what you're telling them. And if you do not open up those processes, you do not identify what campaign, what narrative is at play, then you are going to struggle. How would public institutions respond to this? If you're talking of elections, commissions, I did say you open up your process so that then It is auditable. I mean, it can be audited, and let the public, see what goes into an election. If you are a health agency, you'll want to respond with speed, whatever the issue is. You'll also want to use trusted local messengers, right? And then I liked one of my panelists' previous points about you speaking to people in the communities they are in, and in the language that they understand. If you are a court, you'll want again to have your rulings, given out in public. I mean, in plain language, so that the people can understand what the ruling really is about. And if you are in the security space, you do want, again, to be able to quickly identify the narratives. So it depends what, the institution is, right? Sorry? Yeah. No, we can follow the question. Yes, all right. So depend on what the public institution is. Obviously, the challenge is different, and it's going to have a different solution. What approach do you consider most effective? Do I consider most effective? Transparency has to be one of them. How that takes effect is a secondary question, but I mean, some institutions can be more transparent than others, but you do want to take the public through your process, as we say, take them into your confidence, and let them know what's happening. Yes.
Thank you so much, because we have so many questions more here. But just to review the last questions, it was, how concerned are you that the force to counter disinformation made themselves threaten freedom of expression? And here, the majority says somewhat concerned, and also very concerned. And, 2 votes says not concerned, and we have 1 vote that says minimal concern about this. But I want to start our Q&A, also another question that we have here, because about media literacy, this is something that Virginia, you tell us in the end of your interview, and this was about the second question also. But what works in your experience? What are the most effective strategies to counter disinformation about public institutions? Is just media literacy the approach that helps in this moment, or it's another one, because we are talking about public institutions?
So it's a tough question. I think that the most effective strategies combine the reactive approach and the preventing measures. So a reactive approach is, of course, what fact checker does. And so we need to demonstrate that some claims are false, that information that's spread online are not accurate. But research shows that pre-bunking and preventive approach can be even more effective. And by preventing approach, I mean media literacy and also information about the sources. This is something NewsGuard, the company I work for, strongly believe in. If we provide a context to readers about the news, we add the information that otherwise is missing. Who's feeding you the news? Who's wrote the piece of content you are reading online? Evaluating news sources provide this kind of information to readers. So what we do at NewsGuard is evaluate news and information sources according to 9 transparency and credibility criteria. These are criteria of journalistic practices, internationally recognized and really basic. So does the site provide information about the ownership and financing? Who's behind? Does the site distinguish news and opinion? If there is an agenda, the agenda is hidden or is disclosed. Opinionated content is properly labeled. Mistakes are corrected in a transparent way, notifying readers about the corrections. The authors, you know who write for the site, which kind of background they have. These are all additional information that goes behind and around the piece of content you are reading. And I think media literacy should really focus on that, starting from really primary school. Sometimes I go to primary school. I was at the school of my daughter last year. There were 9-year-old kids that didn't know that when they are browsing online, they need to understand which kind of website they are checking in order to do their research on lions in Africa, for example. So National Geographic is one source, and the blog of a dentist is another source. Who should we trust? So if we know who's feeding us the news, and if we teach and provide information to citizens, to readers, to people of all ages about the sources they encounter online, they can raise awareness and they can definitely browse with a level of consciousness that is much needed at the moment.
Yeah, so now we are talking about critical thinking, and I think it's very important. But Lee, could you tell us, in the experience of what you have been doing in Africa Tech, what are the examples of effective media and digital literacy programs by governments or civil society, like how you have been doing in Africa, and that have built citizens' resilience against disinformation? If you can give us some examples.
Thank you. I did feel the number of questions in that question, right? But in terms of our experiences, we run a network of fact-checking organizations, which in 2016 there were just 2, and now we're close to 60, 58 last time I checked. And this then means we are learning from organizations that work in French, in English, in Arabic, and there are a lot of lessons to be picked up from all this. But the main one has been that you need to, one, be aware of the local context when coming up with any intervention, but also to use platforms that reach the people where they are. I mean, we've seen quite a lot of data around the growth of the internet in Africa. I think in the last 6 or 7 years, we've seen about 300 million Africans come online for a population of about 1.2 billion. And so about 400 million of those are now online. 300 million are active social media users. But also, there's still a digital divide. Just that number accounts for just about 40% of the population on the continent. And that then means there's a whole, say, 60% of people who can be reached in other in other ways, whether that is radio, which is where the majority of the African population tends to get its information from, or if it's through trusted intermediaries in society, whether it's a church leader or whether it is someone who is prominent and someone who is trusted in the society. But then what works, and that's an interesting way of looking at it. And I like to pick a lesson I drew from Taiwan, which is one of the countries that is quite innovative in fact-checking. And a couple of years back, the then digital secretary, Audrey Tang, came up with an interesting response, which was that institutions want, Taiwanese institutions want to respond to an issue in using the so-called 2-2-2 rule, which was one, to do it in 20 minutes, whatever the falsehood is, to do it it was 20 minutes, I'm forgetting. I know there's a 2-2-2 rule. 20 minutes, 2 images, which are more believable than what was spread, and 200. I forget what that is. Right, it will come back to me just now. I'm no longer what I was in terms of my memory a few years back. But the one thing that struck me was how it was used when there was panic over toilet paper, and I think a lot of our countries experienced this. And so this was put out, in terms of in shareable, funnier memes that were more believable than the actual information. And one of them was the Prime Minister joking that, there should not be panic about toilet paper because we all have, excuse my French, two buttocks, right? And it was so relatable to people that that falsehood was countered, in 1 day or 2 days. Now, that was her own telling, right? It would still be open to testing, to see if less people believed in it after that. But it's an approach where you are being innovative and understanding what is being shared in your community, and then coming up with an intervention that then, tries to push back. Yes.
Thank you so much. Now I want to open the floor. This is the moment. If you have any questions, you can raise your hand. You have questions to our panelists.
Sorry, the missing two was 200 words. So 20 minutes, 200 words, and in 2 shareable memes.
Amazing.
Two, yes.
Thank you. So, is there any question? No? Okay. I have so many questions, and I want to bring this to you, to Lee, because... oh, sorry. Sorry, please. Yes, please.
Yes. So in general, there is a challenge for public institutions to counter disinformation. What is the meaning of this? I mean, is it because this is a new challenge, or is there really an acknowledgement that you have weak institutions, or is that because there is really the challenge of legitimacy, and it's in a way providing a breeding ground for disinformation. So
I think both of you could give us the answer.
Here I would say that public institutions are very often the target of disinformation for, I would say, 2 main reasons. One, because they depend on public trust. So if you lose public trust, you are more vulnerable. And the second one is that they often act during crises and emergencies. And these are the moments where people need information the most. They are eager to understand. And they look for information. And so the information ecosystem changes. And this is a very fertile ground for people who want to put out false narratives and disinformation. So this is my answer. I hope to have an answer to what you meant.
Thank you. Lee?
Thank you. So I think I would also want to bring in the political aspect of what institutions struggle with. And I'll use the example of one country that has struggled with that. And I don't use that country to shame it, but just to show that the cure must not be worse than the disease. So when a public institution has to counter whatever the falsehood is, of course, speed matters, as you mentioned. And I like to say, that the first credible, shareable version in a crisis for a public institution is what people believe. And as a public institution, you want to be the institution that is putting out that narrative. If you cede that space to actors who want to color the narrative, then you're playing catch up. And the challenge with public institutions tends to be a lot of them are going to wait for sign off. You've got to go through layers and layers of people in suits. And no offense to anyone in a suit here who does that, who must sign off, on this decision. So that's taking a day, 2 days. Meanwhile, the narrative has already then grown in that space where there was a vacuum of accurate information. And I think we have plenty of examples, right? So one tends to be that institutional rigidity, that institutions struggle with. But coming back to the question about, another challenge that public institutions struggle with. So a couple of years back, the then opposition leader in Senegal Diomaye was jailed for 11 months for quote unquote publishing false news, right? And he came out and became president 10 days later. And, and then you had a situation where a few months down the line, his administration was criticized by rights group for jailing journalists also, using the same false news laws, right? And here the thing is that you find that institutions then, or governments will probably then want to benefit from one, one approach, and actually do say they are legitimate instances where you can actually, you can actually sanction falsehoods, right? And that's when they're looking to incite voters, or they're looking to suppress, incite violence or suppress voters. But then again, that has to be a very careful line where you are then saying it needs to be tested by a court, and it has to be public. So then that's a situation you have one government, the opposition, falling foul of that and then wanting to use it to its benefit, right? And that is what has been, accused. I'm not saying maybe the case, it's what rights groups and press freedom groups have accused it of doing, right? So then you find that the policy environment also tends to be, weaponized. And then that is also something that institutions have to operate in a very weaponized, environment where they have to figure out who is who and how to, navigate that space. So rigidity, institution, but also then the politics of it all.
Thank you so much, Liam. Virginia, here we have, okay, we can go with this first question and then here, and okay, we have 4 more questions.
Thank you, and thank you for the insightful intervention. No, my question is on data protection.
Sorry, could you tell us, if there is a question specific to one of the panelists or both of them?
Well, I'm
you can
actually
tell us.
throwing it out to whomever finds it easier to respond to. But of course, we're operating in an environment, well, certainly in my environment, trust is at an all-time low, and it is eroding further. And public institutions...
Sorry, just a follow-up. What is your environment?
Oh, I'm sorry, Jamaica.
Yes. Okay, all right.
Right, thank you. And of course, public institutions are increasingly using the Data Protection Act as a reason for not providing the information. And of course, we're operating in an environment as well where social media, YouTube bloggers, and other social media platforms are actually overtaking mainstream media. So the public generally have greater trust in the bloggers than the mainstream media. From your experience, how is it that you balance that risk of disinformation along with the propriety over information because of the Data Protection Act, which prevents the disclosure of critical information that probably is necessary for the public's understanding, that causes a gap. And when there's a gap, someone is going to fill that gap. And they're going to fill that gap with information that may not be authentic, but what is sensational and what sounds right to them. Thanks.
This is tough. I think overall, I would just say that each organizations, institution, platform, and actor in the field should take some responsibilities. Because we often say, we know that people get informed more on social networks than on a news website. Okay, so what's the responsibility of platform to publish something that is accurate? And probably work on policies to make every single actor more responsible for the content they produce and they spread.
No, it's certainly a tough one. I agree on that one, right? I think I'll circle back to saying you need to have interventions that increase trust in whatever environment it is. One of the biggest debates right now in Kenya is about the government planning to sell personal data, belonging to its citizens to whoever wants to buy it, right? And you've got a government saying, no, we'll take out all the identifiers, it's just, harmless information, right? But this is the context is for you to get any government service in Kenya, you have to pay for it through a online portal, right? It's called eCitizen, and pretty much has hundreds of services. So you're going to sign up, you're going to, put your data there and right? And so the government then says, as one of my ways of raising money, bridging a deficit here or there, I'm going to sell this data, I'm going to anonymize it, right? But then you have a government which has a challenge, in terms of, managing its I'm trying to be as careful as possible because I'm at the UN, right? Or rather, there's a deficit in public trust, and that's pretty much for many governments, not just Kenya. And so then there's that strand of the debate where it's like, okay, we can see the case you're trying to make, but how do we trust you to actually do that, And I don't think there is an answer that I've seen about how to go about it. But then that cuts across very many countries, and I think this is where media literacy then comes in, and you have to do it from a very young age, right? So that then you're building your citizens' resilience from a very young age. I think one of the most cited examples tend to be that of Finland, which I think for the last 10 years or so has topped the European Media Literacy Index. I'm sure there's someone in this room who's a bit more informed about it, right? And I think the last edition I saw there were 4 countries along with Finland. But the approach has been that you teach from a very young age. I think from 6, right? And you're teaching it across subjects. Whether it's how governments work or how propaganda works or how image is manipulated, and then it's a whole of society approach, so that then you're not leaving it to just the one public institution, which is government, which has obviously its own interest to then try and bridge that trust. But I don't know if that helps, but it has to be something that has a long tail. It can't be okay. Trust me today because I'm asking you, I'm demanding you to, demanding allegiance from me. I have to have built that over time, and that's where it then becomes a whole of society approach.
Thank you so much. The next question, please. There is a microphone. Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm Aura Martinez. I'm based in Mexico City. I have a question on basically your thoughts on the less popular approaches I'm part of to the answers for these questions. Like, for example, I'm part of the people that think social media algorithms that amplify outrage and sensationalism is one of the bigger issues of misinformation, as well as find an effective counter measure to be regulatory measurements. I think that I didn't hear about this a lot on your intervention, so I would like to hear a little bit more, particularly on the second one, and your feelings about regulatory measures for online platforms, algorithm transparency and accountability, and so on and so forth, especially when it regards to most traditionally disenfranchised groups in society and their role in this.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, just quickly, I'm not an expert on policies, so I just say what I think is relevant here. NewsGuard is a signatory of the Code of Conduct Against Disinformation of the European Commission, so we have participated to the redrafting of the code in 2024, and we can say that there is a focus on these topics, but apparently the results show that it's not enough yet. It's like I was saying, I was talking to Carolina before the beginning of the event. Also, when we see improvement, we don't see consistent improvement. So sometimes there is a change, there is a bit of an impact, but what we need to see now is really a path where we reinforce strongly this kind of policy with actions that are really met by the actors. Now the code of practice become a code of conduct, so there are legal obligations from the platforms. Previously they were just voluntary commitments, so something is changed in that regard as well. Now they can be audited, so they need really to take on responsibilities on what's going on their spaces.
I do agree that platform accountability is a thing, right? And we in Africa have been looking at the developments in Europe, especially when it comes to the Digital Services Act as one of them, and I think there's an AI Act also set to come into play, I think, in the next couple of months. But I remember X being fined at the end of last year. I think quite a huge amount. I think 100 and something million euros for, among the reasons, one, not providing access to researchers to its database for, there must be someone probably more informed about this, right? My point here is we need platforms also to see beyond the business case of its algorithms, because that is what rewards these companies in terms of profits, because then you've got something that becomes more popular, and then it's amplified by the algorithm, and and you've got then a lot of people who spend time, and you can sell that time to advertisers, right? But that profit case is a difficult one, to then balance with the responsibilities that you expect platforms to take, and do governments step in, or do jurisdictions step in? I'm not sure. It would be quite useful to see how, for example, the Digital Services Act holds up over the next 10 years, given obviously the pushback we're seeing by in the US about this kind of law, right? But I am one of those who does think, and this is my personal opinion, at least I can say that, that there needs to be that kind of enforcement, in terms of what platforms can be held to account. I mean, can be held, accountable for, and how to do it is the question that we must all think about. But yeah, it is. Yeah, I think you get my drift. Hopefully.
Thank you so much. Next question, please.
Yeah, hello everyone. Thank you so much to the panel. Great discussion so far. My name is Vahyala. I'm from Nigeria. Of course, my question is directed towards Lee, but also you can also respond if you'd like. I'm afraid I'm not as articulate as the previous people that asked questions, because my question is about developing country contexts and how disinformation or misinformation about government sometimes tends to thrive because there is like an uncertain relationship with information generally from the public sector. So if you look at the Nigerian context, we have a very funny checkered history with authority, and there are prevailing values of paternalism around what government should represent, and paternalism implies that accountability isn't really something you should ask for because the president is our father, father should not be questioned, So it creates a very funny situation where misinformation can arise, or disinformation, and the government doesn't seem like it's interested in giving like a factual response. And I don't know why that is, because there's an incentive for them to build some form of legitimacy and trust where they do. But you may hear conflicting versions of a story from a single ministry and a different version from, say, the office of the president. So, and for a civil society organization, we tend to try to straddle that world. We serve citizens, but also want to have great relationships with the government. What's your take on that? How could one work to counteract that in a situation where you have the government seemingly unwilling to really even confront these things? I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really interesting question, please, Lee.
Well, that was a very articulate question. I don't agree that you're not one of the more articulate question askers, right, in the room. But yeah, I think I like your use of Nigeria because also I did mention we are present in Nigeria, and it has been one of the biggest learning curves for us, in terms of navigating that space where you're hoping as constitutional provided for, you get information, right? But there's so many interests in that information not being made public that you have to figure out ways to go around the problem, right? And then each country has its own, local dynamics, as you mentioned there. But I think this is why we, as an information, ecosystem organization, decided to focus on one, working with other civic organizations, but also looking to tackle it from a question of media literacy. Let us, we are not going to get information about how many roads, for example, were built by previous government or the current government. But can we teach people about how to, one, ask for that information, right? How do you make use of, say, laws that allow you to ask for information, from a public institution? Whether you get the information is a different question, but at least then with more people knowing that is an option, then we can, almost build momentum towards pressuring our governments to, share information that they don't find palatable, they do not want, out in the public for whatever reason that may be. So that calls for collaboration among a number of, civic organizations, but also taking that media literacy approach where you're teaching people the strategies and tactics that are used, so that, you next you see something from whatever institution it may be, then you're able to interrogate it a bit more critically than just taking it for face value. So it's more of a bit of, going around, probably it's a longer path, but hopefully it's more sustainable, if you're teaching people to understand how government works and, how government does not work. And then, finding organizations that you can partner with, who are in various spaces, in that information ecosystem and leaning on each other. So it is a difficult, challenge. I remember, we've had freedom of information requests pending with governments for over 10 years now, right? And then so then we've had to say this is how you would identify if a government has done what it pledged to do, and these are the gaps that are in the data, right? Because also we have a data problem. Sometimes I don't blame governments per se. They may not have that information. A lot of our public institutions, for example, statistics gathering bodies tend to be quite underfunded. So again, you may not have the information, or there may be quite a lot of other factors in play in the government, whether it's political or maybe just one arm not knowing what the other is doing. But then you then take the long-term approach, and sometimes it's not what people want to hear. They want answers right now, and then and then it's quite a tough one, I must say.
Hello, thank you very much for your presentations. It was very interesting, and I'm the lawyer and I'm not in this field. However, it was very, very interesting. You gave us different perspectives and different angles. So Mike, I have two questions to the presenters. First question I have to Mr. Lee. He mentioned an interesting point about disinformation that is targeted to election, health agencies, and courts. I was wondering if there is any like more or less effective strategies that could be used by these institutions. And what I mean in this, for example, the courts. when we're talking about the courts are very, very closed institutions in terms of, for example, giving interviews and so on is not very common for judges and so on. So if there is any strategies related to this specific field, I mean, your experience, if you could share. And I have the second question to the second presenter. You mentioned about the media literacy, and you also mentioned some example from primary school. I was wondering if there is any good practice, maybe from your perspective, or maybe the commonly accepted good practice of countries, how media literacy is implemented in their politics, for example, in educational systems, maybe they are maybe integrated in different subjects or so on. So it would be quite interesting, the media literacy part, not only to disinformation, but also to the, for example, democracy building and for the democracy to work effectively. So these are my questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We can start with you, Virginia.
Yeah, just briefly, I think every single country has different path in terms of integration of these topics into the curricula. I can say something about Italy. I think until a few years ago, these kind of topics just fell into the sensibility of single teachers. So until a few years ago, I got invitation to go to speak also in primary school just from teachers that knew what I was doing and were interested in trying to equip the kids on this fight. Now I think there is a bigger attention on trying to integrate during school hours in the curricula these kind of topics. And I think that's the only way we can succeed. Because if we rely on the sensitivity of single teachers, we can reach only a few kids and probably the one that needed the less. While if the integration is real and there are some hours every month to address this topic, it's the only way. And what I think is successful in the first grades of school is teaching how to look for information. I mean, we know that kids now use devices from a very young age, so they all know how to go online, to look for a video, to look for an information. And more often, also teachers ask them to produce some content using website. And the simple advice of adding the final slide of your presentation explaining how you found the information you provided, I think it's quite revealing for the kids. I noticed that sometimes they didn't do things just because they didn't know, but when you explain and you tell them, if you go there a few months later, you can really realize that they can act differently and they start to pay attention to these kind of things. But yeah, we need something like a very organic approach in order to be able to reach everybody and not just a few.
Thank you. Please, Lee.
Thank you. One of the things I've seen, at least in my neck of the woods, right, is whenever there are major rulings, by courts, there's a technical ruling, right? Sometimes, it comes days after, but when it is given, then there's a public, statement that explains what the ruling is all about, right? And so that plain language approach really does, one help as a strategy to let people understand what the issue, was and, what the ruling was and why that ruling was so. But the other thing I find that courts do not do much about, do not do much of is, sensitizing the public, about how they are, demystifying themselves. and I've seen some judiciaries now able to go around the country and and explain or try to explain what it is they do and how to file a case or whatever challenge that the ordinary person, you and I, might have with the court system. It's then demystified and then you build that kind of trust so that when you have to spend it, then you've accumulated it because you have been able to sensitize ordinary voters, the citizens, about how a court operates and why it operates as it is. Of course, underfunding tends to be an issue, and probably there are people in this room who understand this question much better. But that transparency really does go a long way, so that when the court, the judiciary, has to spend, that currency, then there is enough to go around. But yeah, I'm certainly sure there's a bit more expertise in this room about that.
Thank you so much, Lee. I think that there is no more questions, right? Well, we are out of time, but before we close, I want to ask our panelists for your final thoughts. And I'm pretty sure that we have a lot of things to think about this conversation, but we ask you for your final thoughts. You can let us a call to action, a challenge, maybe, whatever you want, please. Virginia.
Okay, I quickly go back to artificial intelligence. It's just because today NewsGuard launched a new service. We tried to build our own chatbot using the guardrails that we noticed were missing in the others. So if you want to try it, it's called NewsGuard AI. It's available from today. And in the mission of this idea of really thinking that media literacy is the way, we will provide it for free to university students. And we are really eager to measure the impact to see if something that provides accurate information in response to questions about the news can really help consumers to consume news in a better way. So I'll keep you posted on the results. There will probably be a study soon that will test the impact. But yeah, we had the proof, at least in the building phase, that using the right guardrails, the performance could be better.
Yeah, there's so many things I could say as closing remarks, but I think I would settle on us being able to take a whole of society approach to the issue of disinformation. It has so many strands, and breaking those requires everyone who is either beneficiary of or a victim to come into that space and educate, the entire society about the challenges, of false information and the harms, the real world harms it poses. Too often we've seen a lot of disinformation really translate into policy, into violence, and being able to calculate that resilience in audiences, if I may call them that, then is really what I wish we can do, take a long-term approach to the issue rather than looking at it, say, from a project-based approach, I have some money to spend on this, what can I do? But why not invest it in, media literacy, something that, carries society along for a long time, so whole of society approach is what I will campaign. It's a hill I will die on, if I may put it that way.
Thanks again, Lee. And just if you let me say something about this conversation has made one thing clear for me, it's that countering disinformation is not a technical problem with technical solutions. We are talking about a governance crisis, and this requires trust, coordination, and political will. And the last thing is the most important. So it's pretty amazing to share this space in the UN Public Service Forum. So thank you so much to our panelists for your knowledge, for the vibe, for being here, and also the UN and the Ministry of Justice of Georgia. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much to our panel, our moderator. It was a super interesting discussion. I just actually have a housekeeping announcement. I wanted to let you know that, unfortunately, this is for our international participants, that there is a gala dinner tonight in Mitzketa, and that buses will depart from the Sheraton at 6:30 p.m. And then return people to the Sheraton. So we hope you can join.
Yeah, actually, this no, it's difficult. Of course, it's Mtskheta. It's an old capital of Georgia, and it's right the next city actually to Tbilisi, but it's quite close. It takes maybe half an hour or so just to travel there. I hope you will enjoy Mtskheta, even if it's not that sunlight anymore, but still you will find the good architecture there. Thank you very much for today being here, and thank you for being here, our dear panel participants, and see you tomorrow on the panel 2.